Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, people that are frequent listeners to the podcast will know I'm very active in American football as a coach. What they may not know, Nick, is I'm also a very avid bowler. When I was in high school, I quit basketball. As my coach said, if you want to be serious, you have to focus on basketball. At the time, I was a 5'7" white guy, to which I made the right decision. So I picked up bowling. I didn't have his verticals, so a bit tough for me. So I picked up bowling, and I've recently gotten my British friends, because we go golfing every weekend. I've now made them also commit to bowling once a month. So we do our bowling on Tuesdays at Lewisham Lanes in Southeast London. I'm going to let you know, Nick, we went bowling for 4 hours on Tuesday, and I can barely hold this microphone because my right forearm is just about to fall off.
That's the surprising thing, right? When you do a sport that you don't do very often, these little muscles start to hurt, especially when you get older, Chris. You start getting these little aches and pains from places like, I didn't even know I had a muscle there. Why is that so sore? And bowling can be sneaky harsh on the wrist, right? What's your highest score?
So my all-time career high is a 273.
Wow. I'm pumped when I break the three figures, mate. So I don't think we'll be going bowling anytime soon, or I might need a 9-frame head start to give myself a chance. Wow, and cool. So you're bowling. You're playing golf. You've got the American football. You're really into the thick of living the dream, the sporting dream of keeping yourself busy with lots of different sports. Any other sports? You playing basketball periodically? Weren't you doing that for a bit?
Doing a little bit of pickup basketball on a Saturday. They for £5 is a 3-hour open run. So there's usually 25, 30 people there. Basically, if you win, you stay on the court, and no one's in good enough shape to ever win more than 2 games in a row. So basically, you're on for about 15 minutes, off for about 10 minutes, and you do that for 3 hours, and it's fine. So, yeah, the golf one is the new challenge. I started with golf lessons, Nick, because I haven't golfed in probably a dozen years. So I was like, if I'm going to do it, we'll start with lessons, because I didn't want to pick up bad habits and then have to try to correct them. So at the moment, I'm okay with being bad because I know I am, but at some point I will get annoyed by it.
But look, I think that with golf of all sports, that is a very, very smart move, because you can easily train things, especially in golf, that is just really hard to get rid of. But anecdotally, I know a lot of people who've played baseball a number of people that have played baseball over the years that do transfer pretty well to golf in terms of at least the hand-eye coordination of hitting the ball. So I'm sure to transfer, where it's just about breaking some of those habits of baseball, which normally lends to big slices or some quirks that they show. So look, you're keeping yourself busy. That is for sure.
I will say it's just a lovely way to spend time with the boys. You know, the weather's quite nice. It's not like America where it's 90 plus degrees, 30 plus degrees Celsius for the non-Fahrenheit users. You know, it's about 70 degrees, so low 20s, high teens. It's a perfect temperature to be outside.
Yeah, I'm trying to do similar now. So I'm trying to, now that we're in a bit of a routine with life, is to do more sports here. But obviously it's so stupidly hot here in Jamaica that outdoor day sports aren't normally a big goer. But I picked up tennis and golf again. I played both sports as a kid quite a lot. Tennis, I'm having just doing clinics at the moment at 8 a.m. and they've told me I should think about playing in some tournaments in the different grade levels, because let's face it, a place of 2.5 million people, the quality of competition is not quite the same standard as other places. So I think despite my lack of competition efforts over the last 30 years, I apparently will be able to have a game or two down the line. And golf-wise, the golf courses aren't very good here, but it's a good chance to be sociable and drive around a golf cart, because it's too hot to walk around most of the time when the heat's hitting you hard. And now it's rainy season, so actually every afternoon it's basically raining for a chunk of time. So I'll be hiding away in the golf cart quite a bit. So definitely need to get back into the rhythm of sport, because I have missed it. Definitely keeping active and doing some stuff like that makes a big difference to the mindset, as well as the body.
Well, it's just, just you and I, Nick. It's just all sports. Sports during the day, sports at work, sports away from work. It's just it's a lifestyle,
Well, you know what, and I do think that is a little bit of what it is, and I think I've actually regained some of my love for sports since being over here. And really, a couple of the reasons are, back in London, getting a bit more serious, is get stuck in the throes of life, whether it be family, personal life, or work and stuff, and so you struggle to find time for yourself to do things to keep yourself active, and you're trying to find 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And actually, since we moved in, I'm able to access more high quality sports content on TV and able to do some stuff on the weekends and in my spare time. All of a sudden, I'm just more enthused about watching and consuming sports again. Like even last night, I turned the TV on and the US Open's on, so I just start watching a bit of the US Open, seeing Novak Djokovic hit some balls and going, oh, he hits it a little bit harder than I can. But yeah, it does. It's interesting. I just almost like living through a little bit of the things we talk about this connectivity between what a fan is, what a player is, and what an athlete is, and all those different experiences of how you're consuming touch sports and how they can really impact each other positively if you're doing one or the other. The same goes with golf, right? I turned on the golf was on the other day. Oh, I actually started watching it for a couple of hours and watched the final part of the final round. I haven't watched the final round of a non-major in 10 years. So, yeah, it's just interesting to feel that experience living out when we're talking about a lot through the lens of fans. Well, actually, I'm living it myself a little bit, which is quite cool.
Yeah, well, I've avoided any golf content on YouTube because what concerns me is there's probably a lot of people that think they know the right way to golf. And I feel like golf's one of those things, no two people are successful the same way. And you should be, conscious of just following whoever on YouTube on the best way to correct your swing. So I'm usually someone that'll look for best tips and tricks on YouTube for different things in life, but I'm a little nervous to look for golf tips on YouTube.
What you're going to find yourself, Chris, is you start to play more golf, is you start walking around the house randomly and walking down the street and start like doing little mimics of your golf swing. And that's when you know you're really hooked. There is some actually really, really good golf content. I talked about Bryson DeChambeau, what he's done. He's got like 1.4 million subscribers now, which is mad. Not comparing himself to, was it Cristiano Ronaldo's new channel? He launched and a week later, it's what, 50 million or 20 million? I can't remember the number off the top of my head. It is. He's done 20 videos. I think it's like 50 million subscribers after a couple of weeks, which is just crazy. But there's just loads of great golf content on there. And it's enabled by things like these apps you can use that can do shot traces and stuff, people on phones and apps and so forth. It just brings the content to life. And again, I think it's just a great, beautiful circle of watching that sort of content draws you to watch some of the pros in action as well. So yeah, I've watched way too much golf content, and it's actually has given me the interest in playing more. So again, it's just all one big loop.
It's a great circle of sports, I
have to say the one thing though, in terms of playing golf, we can get to the business stuff shortly, but one thing about playing golf in a place like I am in Jamaica is the golf course. I think I might have mentioned this before, part of it, but the golf course is it's surrounded by housing and there's a main road that runs through the golf course and you have to like run across the road to make sure you don't get hit by cars to cross the other side of the golf course. The second hole is the green ends 2 meters before the fence line, and there is 2 meters further, there is cars on a fast road. So every time I hit a club, I hit like 2 clubs less just to de-risk the fact that I don't want to put a golf ball on that hole. And one time I saw someone hit a ball and they hit the fence, like they thinned it basically. They thinned the ball, so it was going like a rocket. And if that had got through the fence, it would have just destroyed a car. So I am so paranoid. Anyone who's seen me play golf with me knows I can hit it long, but I can hit it long and wide. And I actually put one ball over another road on that course. So I didn't hear any bangs and cracks. So I'm trying to teach myself how to get a little bit more control, because here they have not built the course fit for purpose for a player like me.
Well, we could talk about golf a lot more, but we will move on to business. And the story we'll start with, Nick, is a bit of an interesting one. It follows a bit of a trend that we've been seeing in Europe, particularly with football. And it now looks like Ligue 1 in France and Serie A in Italy are now going to go with a direct-to-consumer approach in the UK after failing to secure any bid, an adequate bid. I'm not quite sure what the news was on that, but they are going to go direct-to-consumer. And it's an interesting one, Nick, because we've talked so long. And I actually think when I started at SportsPro 5 years ago, I first heard Andreas Hayden talking about it with DFL, talking about we would build an OTT proposition to use as a threat, as a negotiating tool if we didn't get what we wanted. It wasn't our plan, but we could do it if we had to. But it looks like some organizations are now doing it, Nick. So I don't know if you just have any initial thoughts or perhaps want to outline maybe some of the, what drove Ligue 1 and Serie A to have to make this decision.
Sure. Well, I think it's one of these things that we all saw and thought was coming. we saw this moment in the industry happening where major leagues were going to start going more and more direct to consumer. But what we didn't hope or predict was the fact that these leagues were going to have to do it a little bit under duress. It was initially under the guise that this was going to be an opportunity to unlock more eyeballs, unlock new fans. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite way around. What we've actually seen is there is just a lack of commercial appetite for broadcasters in a fairly monopolistic market because of what Sky has in place to bid on rights that don't move the needle in subscriptions. And therefore, the potential price tag for all this extra sports content is just not available to the rights owner or the sports property to attract. And so they're having to go this way to try and generate any sort of significant income. Otherwise, I think the conversation would be pretty stark one. My view of what expectation would be of, say, what League One would have as a conversation with someone like Sky was like, well, we've added all these extra platforms and distribution methods now. So what we're able to bring to you is the biggest possible audience set possible in the UK to access League One football. What we're not going to do is pay you a big premium rights check for it, but we'll give you this distribution so you can build your audience in this market, and then it'll be up to you to drive the returns off of that extra awareness and reach through other means, to other digital partnerships. And that's just, it's going to take so much for the industry, so much for these leagues to shift and find an alternative way to generate enough income off these media revenues or alike to handle the turbulence that's going to create for a lot of these teams and clubs that are being bought by private investors on the basis that media rights are going to go through and through the roof. So it's a really, really tricky predicament for, say, Ligue 1 to navigate. They're not going to have a huge appetite in this market. You're talking about people that have a embedded interest in French teams and leagues. So whether it's just French speakers from different French-speaking nations that might have different. Typically, the French league has a real over-indexes dramatically on top French-speaking stars from all the different nations, potentially through Africa and other markets. Maybe there's a bit of a marketplace there in the UK for it, but it's not going to be the revenue driver that they ever would have hoped and potentially expected. Now let's rewind the clock back a bit. Rewind back to like 5, 6, 7 years ago when they started bringing in your Neymars and your Zlatans, and PSG became this powerhouse. And the objective there was that was going to be a springboard for the league to put them right at the top of those top 5 European leagues as an attractive league for fans to follow closely. And now just the result of that investment into players and then moving on is that now all of a sudden there's possibly almost a negative stigma that the league perhaps 5+ years ago was in a pretty good state. And maybe, I'm not a judge and expert on talent, maybe what the league in today isn't too far off what it was 5 years ago. But perception will always be, if you take some of the top stars away from a league like that, the perception is going to be that the quality has dipped dramatically. It's natural that would be the case. And therefore, if football fans in markets like the UK, where they have lots of choice between the Premier League, Champions League, and then all these other leagues that exist across the world, they're never going to be prepared to fork out for a significant bigger investment in buying a subscription to a product like this, in my view. So it's going to be really, really tricky for Ligue 1. I really hope it works. I really hope it brings the maximum potential they can get out of it, because if it works, the opportunity for other sports to follow, and they will follow quickly, will be really, really rapid, and a good thing for the industry to build more direct relationships. But it is a tricky moment for Ligue 1 yet again.
So the first question I have to that is, should other leagues be concerned? It's sort of, should they also be like, oh, if this is happening to them, we should probably accelerate our plans? Or are they putting their head in the sand? Or what should be the reaction when leagues see this happening?
So one is that they help put their head in the sand, but they definitely can be prepared. I think what you and I used to hear for a number of years, is that most leagues are ready for it and they're using it as a negotiation tool. But they're hoping they don't need to play that card because someone's going to give them a nice check and they don't have to worry about it. This, I think, is the first sign that this is going to happen. It's going to continue to happen, and Ligue 1 will not be the only ones to suffer the consequence of having to go direct to consumer. The long-term prospect is, it could work out really well for Ligue, and if they're able to create a really great relationship with fans somehow, not just on the live match perspective, but something deeper than that. But that is easier said than done. And I think everyone will just be following closely. The term fast mover, fast follower will probably be what you'll see, is others will start following them quickly in markets where perhaps the commercial upside is borderline. So they'll need to have a platform that is dynamic and able to be serving audiences in different market by markets, rather than something that is sort of positioned as a global proposition. Look, so I think it's been on the cards for a while. The threat has been lurking for an amount of time, but more as a threat to try and drive up pricing. Now I think it's more as a result of we haven't got a lot of choice here, so we're going to have to play this card. But think about what Serie A's had to go through since, I think it was being they determined that this major Serie A deal they had was now effectively non-exclusive because of the growth of piracy. Since then, they've gotten through this really tough journey of media rights revenues dipping, no one coming to compete with being at the level that they were there back then. So having to do deals with YouTube across the MENA region to try and make sure that they could be visible in those markets. And they had really lofty goals we talked about a lot in this pod, where they were aiming for a big $1 billion revenue target on media rights, and in fact have had to take a fraction of that again. This whole new spliced and diced and fragmented approach on media rights is not fit for purpose in this day and age when there isn't enough competitive tension in the broadcast market. So you're going to see more of it. You're going to see a lot more of it. The question is how quick and how much more we'll see of it. I think if Ligue 1 and Serie A, now let's be clear, Serie A is doing a deal with OneFootball, who we've talked about a lot in the pod. That relationship will be quite different from a traditional partnership perspective. We should talk about that. OneFootball typically, as far as I understand, and I don't know the terms of this particular arrangement, but I would have guessed it's following a similar route, is that they would agree a rev share deal basically on distribution would be the partnership. So it would be a shared risk, shared reward model, and OneFootball would enable them to be able to distribute content in that market. That is very different to what any deal that might have looked like with Warner Brothers Discovery for TNT Sports or Sky. So it is still with a platform, still with a third party in the same way DAZN is doing in Ligue 1. It's a traditional media rights deal. The OneFootball one is most likely to be very much a shared risk reward partnership and share all revenues that are created through the subscription approach that they're taking. So I don't know if I can't remember what the question was, but I think that was an important point to make, because it is a very different approach to, say, going direct to consumer like Ligue 1 are.
Well, I think part of it is you talked about people saw this as a proactive opportunity with OTT, but it feels like Ligue 1 is doing it from a reactive perspective. But we've seen people like the NFL with their Game Pass. I don't know if DAZN's saying it's successful, but even before the DAZN deal, NFL had successfully launched their platform with the likes of Delta Train, Two Circles. We've seen the NBA is now going to have an international deal that can work for out of home markets. We've seen some of these international OTT platforms. I mean, even NBC Peacock with the Premier League, we've seen some of these international deals, but let's say domestically going D2C, the ex-chairman of Crystal Palace, Simon Jordan, famously went out and talked about there's X amount of Premier League fans. If you charge them £100 a year, you'd make $3 billion annually, which is more than Sky. So what the hell are they waiting on doing it? Does that add up though, Nick? Because I think people don't actually, or at least when I speak to my family members, my mother, she's like, why is streaming so expensive? Why? And I don't think it actually works almost as well domestically as people might think, or it's not as simple.
Sure. So a couple things in there. One is that because Ligue 1 is taking this approach in an international market, in the UK market, my point before is that they're going to have to target a very specific group of people. French speakers, French nationals, and they're actually one of the things that comes up in the article that we published on SportsPro is that they're looking to do specific partnerships through basically their French. I'm not sure what the organization is, but the point of contact, the official government point of contact in the UK, to really ensure that French nationals know that this product is available. And this is where this challenge is. It's all about the marketing of it, because what can easily happen when you launch a direct-to-consumer product, if there's not enough marketing clout and impetus behind it, and it's difficult in this world when so much content is published through social and an international way, it's not capped and constrained by IP addresses or regions in the same vein, is that piracy can again win here, because people will just do a search maybe to find it, and they'll get pointed to whoever's coming up on Google. And if it's not the right organization or it's just listed alongside the Ligue 1 pass, the risk is that piracy could win more and more business as a result of that. So that is a big challenge for this, for Ligue 1 to make sure that they're able to market this and create a lot of awareness. And the same goes for if they were to do this domestically. They did share some numbers on what they were projecting they could. So they leaked to try and drive up the targets, but that is all speculation because we've not seen, it's pretty unprecedented to see a product like this go to market in a domestic setting, and pretty unprecedented to see it go in a market of the size and scale of the UK as well. Now, the other point I wanted to raise was the interesting part of this, which I don't think would get a lot of coverage publicly, is that the Ligue 1 pass is with Endeavour Streaming. Endeavour is largely seen as one of the more prominent platforms and players in the market. And what is interesting about working with them is they're part of the IMG business. Now, what they typically do, from what I understand, is they won't just build you a platform and let you get to work. They will work with you to work the financials out to determine how successful this product can be. And potentially the deal might look like they might take a stake in it or underwrite some of the risk for Ligue 1 to launch that platform. So there might be just some of that underneath the hood of this, is that they're launching a product. Some of the risk might be shared between IMG or Endeavour Streaming in this instance. So it is de-risked a little bit for them. And Endeavour Streaming is really good at doing these things. They've been really good at not only delivering the product, but marketing these things, because IMG is one of the best in the game at marketing. So having that extra clout behind them at least de-risks it from being up to Ligue 1 to market the product independently and make this work for them.
Yeah, and I think that's the point of it. And I was even trying to explain it to one of our new starters here at SportsPro, trying to explain the ecosystem. And she said, well, why don't leagues just sell it themselves? And you start to explain the production cost, the marketing cost. Now you have to have a customer service team. Like this whole idea, like I said, that, Crystal Palace, former chairman, was trying to talk about is it's not just pure profit. Like there's so much cost. And our technology editor, Steve McCaskill, made a great point. It's like when you go to a restaurant, it's the same thing. The restaurant's got to pay for its rent. It's got to pay for its servers. It's got to pay for the delivery of the goods. It's got to pay for taxes. It's not just, oh, there's this many fans, we sell it for this price, and that's the profit that we get. It really is a lot of risk.
That's a great example. And even if you think about, I'm going to get a bit obscure here with this sort of analogy and metaphor, but look, you talk about the restaurant analogy, which is a great example. I think of like what's happened with Deliveroo and Uber Eats and those types of organizations. Even on the face of it, you might be generating all this income on the sale, but actually there's all these different partners and players creating extra costs or taxes or alike. And actually the restaurant's not making nearly as much as you think. In some instances, they can even be losing money on, not losing money, but like really generating less income than you would really expect off the cost of that purchase, because of the fact that it is intermediaries at play here taking shaving off the top. So I think that can happen in these OTT worlds, where if you start partnering with people, you don't just get all that revenue going straight in. It's not 100 million of revenue going direct into our coffers. There's all these other costs that will play a role that all of a sudden that nice big revenue number can be dwindled down really quickly to its impact on the bottom line.
Well, we're going to talk a little more about D2C, Nick, when we talk about our SportsPro Madrid event. But just one other news story we want to talk about that came through is basically the state of the RSN world in the USA. For those that aren't aware, with the RSNs, they've been going through a bit of a tough period in time, largely due to the trend of cord cutting. And so much of the RSN business was kind of tied up in the traditional cable TV game. With all that taking place, we've seen a couple of bankruptcies, but it does look like Diamond Sports Group is going to potentially dig themselves out a little bit. And it's just been announced that they've extended some partnerships with the NBA and the NHL. There's some nuance into that, given some teams being involved and not being involved. But on the face of it, Nick, with what we know about RSN, sort of where we're at today, how meaningful is this news to see there's a little bit of a glimmer of hope?
Well, all I know is from what I've been hearing from across the industry is every single team and league has been trying to nail how they're going to approach this near to medium term future. And this is in a lot of different veins. One is that the revenue dip. So the deals that are being agreed with Diamond Sports Group are a fraction of what the original agreements are. But it was the only way to get a broadcast deal in place for some of these teams in their local markets. Otherwise, there'd be no revenue and they'd have to go and do it all themselves. And that was the big challenge here is a lot of these teams have been looking at, well, how do we do it ourselves? And some have taken the step, some have taken the commitment of like, well, you know what, we're just going to go all in here and we're just going to jump into it. Like it could be the Mavericks, it can be the Jazz, it can be the Clippers, it can be a few others that we're just going to take a different approach, a different journey to the legacy of working with an RSN to broadcast our content. So now it's good for fans generally, and it is good for the NBA and the NHL that they are getting distributed again through traditional means, because we know that traditional means still drives the biggest share of audience and share of eyeballs that any sports can look to receive. But it does still feel like a bit of a stopgap measure until something happens with Diamond Sports Group, something dramatic to resolve all of this. So longer term. So yeah, good that a deal's been done, but it still feels like it's very much on a knife's edge as to what the long-term future is. What I'm also hearing is that a lot of teams are really down the line of like, how do we get ourselves ready to launch our own products and propositions? So they're all at different stages, a bit like what we've seen in Europe over the years of like different sports properties are at different steps of the journey on how quickly they want to jump into this ecosystem. Some of them are much more ahead, and some of them are just getting their ducks in a row now, talking to vendors, talking to different partners, talking to experts to try and get a sense of what they need to do, what's the right approach. So they're all getting ready or are ready to pull the trigger if some of these deals don't play out. And even if they do play out for now, it's only going to be a season, and then they'll be looking again to potentially pull the trigger on something else.
Yeah, I think I did see that the deal has a lot of asterisks about when it could potentially end, depending upon success. And as you mentioned, I think they're taking anywhere from 30 to 40% of a pay cut to make the deal happen, which is interesting as to whether or not, does that just go to show how difficult and tough it is that teams aren't even willing to take that step to go at their own and they'll just take the reduced fee? Like, I think that potentially is the message that they're sending.
Yeah, big time. Like I think you put yourself in the shoes of a sports team and go, oh, we're going to cut 30 to 40% of your media revenues for your number one core market. That's a bitter pill to swallow, and a pretty difficult one when most of it is pretty tightly regulated in how the revenue is distributed. But think if that happened in the Premier League or in other football leagues where some of it's more centralized to take a 30 to 40% cut. It's as dramatic as what we've been talking about with what's happened in Ligue 1, for example. That sort of cut is 30, 40% less than what they had predicted they were going to get as a revenue. So to run a business and all of a sudden have this revenue that you've been predicting longer term to come in, this ain't going to happen. It is a tough pill to swallow. What is going to be interesting to see, I think, generally, is we've seen this boom in terms of the valuations of sports teams in the US. It just keeps going up no matter what. Whether it's just printing money if you own a team. Does this have an impact on their values? It really should. But if it doesn't, you've got people like Sportico and Forbes who follow their valuations and do their own modeling. If it doesn't have an impact on their values, it just shows that the value of these teams is purely just who's got the biggest wallet and wants to be a team owner. And that is it. Because there's no one that can be looking at this positively and going, this is a good sign for the long-term future of the sports teams in terms of revenue generation through media, in spite of these other bigger deals going on. And look, I know there's some pretty big major deals that have happened at a national level that we've covered, but not in the same vein.
Well, we might go off piece. You might have a way to spin this, but you just talked about team values, and I thought it was really interesting. The NFL has recently just voted to allow private equity. Again, there's nuance to that, to the degree with which they'll allow that. I also found it really funny that Mike Brown, owner of the Cincinnati Bengals, was the only one to say no, despite being the poorest of the owners. And I use poor in a relative term there. But I was wondering whether or not, the NFL and its media deals has something to play with the attractiveness of getting private equity involved. Again, we didn't prep for this question, Nick, but you talked about team values. I saw the story about the NFL and private equity, and I certainly have to think there's got to be something tied into all the different media deals for that.
Oh, the media revenue component of why a private equity firm would buy into sports is so critical. And in fact, that's been the legacy of what most private equity firms have been buying when they've been investing into sports internationally. If you look at all of the major deals we've seen from private equity investment firms, they've almost always been linked with the commercial revenues generated from media rights because it's been so bankable. With the NFL, they are the exception rather than the rule because they have so much great revenue tied down for the next 8-9 years as part of those legacy contracts, that's largely locked in place. They don't have anything to worry about. So for the next 5 years, the private equity firms, if they're making an investment, they're going to be out before the next deal's done. They're not going to be hanging around for 8-9 years. They want to be out in probably 5 years' time once they believe that their investment's done enough to grow to a scale that makes it applicable for an exit for them. So NFL's in a unique position, whereas the others, which have much more of a bedrock in regional sports, regional markets and regional deals, they're really impacted, I think, a lot more significantly. I think that's a legacy of these 82 game plus seasons that you've got in most of those other leagues as well, right? So it is a different model, a different approach. So they're a lot more held to account by these regional deals than, say, the NFL is.
Now, bringing us back on track just to finish things up with the Diamond Sports news, is part of that as well is that it was originally reported that Amazon was going to invest $115 million into the business, and they've now pulled out of that. Any sense from you, Nick, sort of what that means? Obviously, we know Amazon have been really selective and strategic sort of where they go. And I do know Amazon's done some different stuff with particular WNBA teams where they've been really regionalized in their approach. How significant, or do you just have a gut feel on kind of what that means for Diamond Sports to be losing that investment from someone that's a tech-focused business like Amazon?
Yeah, so the arrangement from what I understood was basically Amazon would basically ingest all of the different RSNs that they had available through the Diamond Sports Group and make them available on Amazon's channels. So that they basically, as part of it, they gave $115 million as an investment into their, basically to help them cover some of their bankruptcy costs. And in return, they would get these channels on their platforms and probably have some sort of revenue share component of the subscription access, I guess. So I guess it just means that they don't think that deal, that relationship's worth approaching anymore. Amazon's been very selective and careful on how they wanted to approach deals. So, we've seen the massive investment they made with the NBA recently, but they've also pulled out of the Premier League in the UK and a few other markets. It could be also linked with some of the legacy of this sort of bankruptcy situation and proceedings, that they maybe don't want to be connected with any of that moving forward. Again, I'm not privy to what's happening in the courtroom, so to speak, but that could be definitely a one of the reasons that's an issue. And perhaps the agreement that was made between Diamond and Amazon at the time just wasn't as valuable for Diamond as perhaps some of the other people that are willing to put money into this to help them remain solvent. So I don't think it's a huge loss for Amazon. It was just a nice little feather to the cap of building out the breadth of their catalog without really having to make much of an investment, just become more of a destination for sports fans. And that's been obviously their MO, particularly in Europe. But I don't think they're too worried about the fact they've lost this. And I think Diamond just loses another distribution opportunity ultimately. So obviously they didn't need that $115 million that much. And $115 million doesn't really sort out the bankruptcy issues to the level that they need. They need a lot bigger check than that.
For sure. I mean, I'll take $115 million, but it is what it is. But shifting things slightly, Nick, we're not always too self-promotional, but one of the things we do want to talk about is our upcoming SportsPro Madrid event, because we are sort of getting to that stage where we're going to start focusing more on it. It is obviously for us our sort of pinnacle event when it comes to sports media. So I guess just to talk about that a little bit, to give people a bit of a little insight into that, a little extra motivation to come be a part of it. You can obviously start wherever you want, Nick, but I guess maybe the place I would start with is, it used to be the SportsPro OTT Summit, and you could perhaps talk a little bit why that was launched, but maybe talk a little bit about the evolution of where it is today.
Yeah, look, I think to take a step back even from the event itself, to your point about why the event kind of exists, it reflects what's been happening in the industry over the last 6-7 years. When we launched the OTT event in Madrid originally 6-7 years ago, we did that off the back of just this huge amount of interest and excitement around the OTT sector as a whole. What sort of role was it going to play in sports? And there were a lot of questions and people looking for a lot of answers. And that's been the case for a number of years, is what role can OTT have, particularly for sports teams, clubs, and even leagues in this whole new era of direct-to-consumer. What we've learned along the way is it's not as easy as everyone kind of hoped. And I'd say we've played a pretty important role at trying to connect those organizations and those people together to try and, I guess, ride that journey through together to work out what the best approach is around OTT. And the outcome really has been OTT is a really important part of a much bigger approach. You can't compartmentalize OTT without looking at the full broadcast picture and the media strategy. And so one of the things we decided to do last year is to shift this event and expand it to be much more full 360 of the sports media landscape. So when I talk to teams and leagues, they never talk about the one thing. They're talking about what the exposure they're getting through social media is just as important as what they're getting through their traditional broadcast channels, and then launching in the direct-to-consumer proposition plays a different role in their mix. And so what we're trying to do with SportsPro Madrid, and I think we are doing this as well as anyone in the industry in the world, is trying to create a forum where all of that can be discussed. And we can discuss not only who's doing it right, who's doing it wrong, what are the big trends, right across the entire media ecosystem and not just in the OTT vertical itself. So that means more of a lot of everything, basically, more around content creators, what they're doing through social, how that's working on platforms like YouTube, TikTok, etc. It is still doubling down. And actually, I think we're almost seeing a new wave and a new era around OTT with what we've talked about today, what we're seeing in the US with regards to more and more teams looking at this with regards to the RSN situation, but also what we've seen with Ligue and Serie A, and also what broadcasters are doing and how they're taking this new approach through distribution. And finally, what's happening on the advertising side about the role advertising's playing. So all of that is a big melting pot of things that the industry is trying to work through sports media. And of course, what's happening in media rights. And so Madrid is basically the forum where all of that is being discussed, and connections are being made and discussions are being had on stage and off stage to work out how this is all going to shape up for the future.
Well, it's interesting. You talked about advertising specifically. I can remember when I attended my first Sports Pro OTT Summit / Sports Pro Madrid, depending on when you came into it. It was all about subscriptions. Everybody wanted to be the next Netflix and how do I grow subscribers? But even people as successful as Netflix and Disney realized we actually can't be a subscription only business. And now you're seeing more things that are being driven towards advertisement or other different monetization models. And, Nick, I know you'll want to jump on the advertisement side thing, and you can. And I guess the other question I asked for that is not only where has it evolved from a topic perspective, but is there any particular topic you think is going to be coming up this year that will be much bigger than perhaps what it was in previous years?
Yeah, I think just content creation is going to be a big topic, and then and I'll get to the monetization bit in a second. That's going to be the other part. But content creation in the fact that we have our SportsPro AI event next month in September. Now that event in itself is going to be hugely focused on what the role AI is playing in content creation. That's going to filter into Madrid heavily because every team, club, and league and broadcaster is looking for ways to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of their content creation. So that's a much bigger part. Whereas before, it wasn't quite as prominent. And that's because the content that sports was creating was pretty, I don't want to say vanilla, or like there wasn't a lot of creativity there because it was difficult to be very creative. It was focused on live, non-live, highlights, maybe some documentary series, and that's kind of it. Now we're trying to look at all different ways of creating content that's not just about the on-field product, that's going to engage audiences, building an audience base and building up monetization opportunities. The other bit, you talked about advertising, and I talked about monetization. The other big bit is it's not just advertising, but it's how do you bring down the barriers to entry and then allow that big wide net to drive revenues for you. So in the same way that social media has been able to create huge opportunities for content creators of building huge audiences across the globe without any barriers to entry to access their stuff, how do you turn that into new commercial opportunities to drive meaningful, serious revenue for a club or a league or a federation or even a streaming platform? And that bit we've been talking a little bit about, but like you said, the priority's been subscription for so long. Now it is really about, well, what happens if we do take the floodgates open and we make the product as open as possible? How can we drive more value? Is it through advertising? Is it through sponsorship? Is it through e-commerce? Is it through selling other things? Is it through other new licensing deals to sell other pieces of content? Is it sponsored shows? A bit like YouTube you're seeing with content creators. It's basically like sports is trying to mimic more and more of the content creator world and how they can make that drive meaningful value and return for them, for their media strategy. And so that's what we're focusing a lot more on. It's the revenue generation component of all aspects of media and very much the delivery side of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing just for me is that we get a lot of repeat attendees, shout outs to our friends like Andreas Hayden, Mike Armstrong. They're coming every year. And I think part of that reason is because no one's found an answer yet. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about the Madrid event, and this isn't to take away from the New York event, is Europe just feels so much more fragmented. And this is kind of my shout out to the Americans, particularly those teams that are having to look at what am I going to do if my RSN deals fall apart. Madrid's probably a really interesting event for you to come to because the amount of sports federations that are based in Luzon over here, the amount of second tier, third tier football, even, within their own, the EFL, the championship over in the UK, they've had to be far more clever, creative, financially sensible with the way they approach these different things, that I think it does offer a bit of a different dynamic to sometimes that we hear at the New York events, that it's not entirely monolithic, but you get the big five sports organizations, the big broadcasters. They're not always as, I would say, clever or creative or have a need to really be innovative the way some of the organizations over are in Europe.
Big time. And I think that's where these events, I'm not just saying it because it's ours, but I do really feel this. Like these events, these moments, these year-on-year times that you can go to an event like ours, you get a new snapshot of where the industry's looking, how it's thinking by just having lots of conversations, as well as what you see on stage. And that helps us. That helps people who are in the industry of, hey, I have never thought about that actually. Or have you seen what this company's doing? It might not have got a lot of coverage yet. And this allows them to continually think outside the square and look for other ways of thinking. So it is a real melting pot of almost like proactive innovation, like people who are actively seeking new ways of thinking. Whereas sports has historically struggled with thinking outside the square, thinking innovatively, because it's not needed to. It's relied so heavily on third-party deals for so long. So as sports has become a media and entertainment industry more and more, this event's become, I think, really critical for that. And I'm really excited about it. I'm looking forward to getting that in to go last year because I was literally mid-move at the time, but I'll be definitely there this year and looking forward to it.
Well, we'll look forward to having you back and join some Top Us as well. It's always great. There's obviously the OTT awards as well. We're well past the deadline at that, but it's always really good for us. Nick, I'll just say behind the scenes, you and I both involved in the judging process, getting to read some of the different applications. I know the judges really enjoy that because it's a great opportunity to see what different businesses are doing from a tech perspective, a marketing perspective. There's always seemingly more and more innovation. I'm getting feedback from the judges talking about there's some really interesting stuff coming out this year. And you hear that year on year. And a lot of those companies that are in the awards will be at the event themselves. And it's just, there's really great opportunities to meet a lot of interesting people in a condensed time frame. The way I describe it is, if you're going to look for a piece of tech, you're going to go to Google first, right, Nick? And then you're going to go to different websites. You're going to set meetings. Might take you weeks to get that all sorted out. Come to SportsPro, you can set up all those meetings in one day. It's just a very efficient way. And I know that sounds like me doing a sales pitch, but it is the truth.
It is the truth, though, because the thing with things like Google is it's relying on SEO, it's relying on buying positions on their site. So you do need to have those conversations. I get asked that the most when people reach out to me is like, is this company reliable? Can I trust them? Are they doing anything good? Or who should I talk to at this space? Like people are really confused when they're looking for stuff because they don't quite know where to go. They don't know how much to trust different sources. And word of mouth typically is the best source, and these events really do filter that. So definitely check out this event. You go to type in SportsPro Madrid in Google. Hopefully Google gives us a good SEO ranking and bump there for our own name and the event. But it is definitely my favorite event of the year in terms of it's the most intimate 1,000-person event I've ever been to in terms of just the community vibe you get from it. I really enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, appreciate you for joining us for this week's episode, and we will catch you next week.
Thanks, everyone. Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Stream Timers. Until next time.